Welcome to the Democratic Socialist Libertarian, DemSoLib. Today I have the pleasure and privilege of talking to Jamarl Thomas of the Progressive Soapbox. Jamarl, thanks for being here.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, just for those of you who don't know, this cat is like, he is like laying down, he's exposing the crimes of the corporatocracy, and he is pushing us in the direction of a Kardashev Type 2 Star Trek civilization. And I saw the Star Trek poster on your wall. I see you're a next generation kind of guy.
I, I'm both actually. It's just so happened that there's a GalaxyCon that was here. I think it was maybe a few months ago, and we go there, and what's his name? Worf I can't think of his name. He's giving a speech, and you have all of these characters from Next Generation that are there. Worf, the Doctor, not the Doctor. I'm sorry, Worf, Data, Q is there. He's awesome. Like all of these people are there. And so you get the opportunity to get these guys to actually sign on to the poster. Odo was there from Next Generation. I mean, from Deep Space Nine. So yeah, I am a Star Trek fan. I'm a Trekkie, to say the least.
Yeah.
That's putting it mildly.
Cool. I mean, now we could discuss it. Just for the record, I'm old school Kirk, over Picard, but that's a whole other debate. So we'll have to get into
that. I like both. Honestly, I like both. They're different things, right? Like, the original series was more of a Wild West type scenario. These guys were out there kind of flying by the seat of their pants.
Absolutely.
The Next Generation, it's more, they're more in the, not utopian, because there's no such thing as utopia. It's more like you move towards, you're always moving towards something, and it's kind of more environmentally dependent. But from what we would consider, it was utopia. That starship was like a resort, like a cruise ship. And this was just their life. You know what I mean? Like when Picard, one of the awesome segments, Picard, these guys are like in a time capsule or something. These guys like freeze themselves. And the Next Generation has the technology to bring these guys out. And one of these guys are a full-blown capitalist, like a full-blown, money is the greatest thing on the planet. And he's in this argument with Picard. He's like, what is the point of your existence? Now, mind you, he's arguing this from the basis of somebody who's arguing from the perspective of something that's not even real. Right. And he's like, what is the basis of your existence? Picard is like, human development, growth in and of itself is a reason in and of itself for existence, not this notion of cash and profit. And the guy is broken from this because all of his life, what he identifies himself as is essentially somebody for profit. It's an awesome episode, but yeah, I like all of them. Each one has their own thing that, that digs into you.
You just touched on some heavy stuff that I don't know if people want us to go into the Star Trek direction, so I'll go because I want to ask you about your show.
No, that's that's fine. I didn't mean to go there. People in my channel know, man.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful stuff. I could talk about that for hours. Okay, so let's get to where we are now in our present time and space.
Yes.
So just give us, first tell us a little bit about your show, for those people who aren't familiar with you, who may have come in through this portal, and, just if they want to reach you, what's if they want a website or what, your YouTube channel, just how they, connect with you.
So the show is named Jamarl Thomas. It's essentially just named me. I didn't necessarily start it with the notion of having a show. I just kind of had a channel, and I just started putting content on the channel itself. I started off, I guess, activated under Sanders in a weird way, like, studying historical stuff and then getting really deeply into this thing of history, like, outside of school, like it was while I was working, but history, like, and being fascinated by it and not quite understanding why the politics doesn't necessarily line up with the message that we get in regards to an American perspective of the world, or for that matter, even domestic policy. And I realized, oh, right, they're corrupt. It's like you come to a realization of that, the American public wants X, but they don't get X. Trump, because think about it for the moment. Trump goes into office with income inequality at its worst as ever. And his solution is, yeah, we need a tax cut. We need to give more of that expropriated wealth to the top 1%. It doesn't line up. Like whether you're under Democrat or Republican, it doesn't line up to what the public wants. And so I was pissed off. Like there was a certain degree of rage that was associated with that. And I would do videos where it would just be me bitching, me complaining. And I started ending up with somewhat of a Jack Fresco view of the world. You know, this notion of like a Venus Project-esque thing. And somewhere along the way, that became more political because I realized that there is, even Fresco himself doesn't know how to get from point A to point B. And ultimately, you end up with.
Who did you say from point A to point B?
It's called the Venus Project.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's almost like this notion of a cashless society or a technological society where technology itself meets the needs of humanity as opposed to like the 1%. Like, you know, if you think of how much wealth we have in the world, and even if you think of what we did in World War II, like in regards to the movement that we did in regards to technology and materials and supplies, this notion that we have poverty around the planet is nonsense. It's an entirely chosen direction. And Fresco's point is, well, use technology to meet the needs of humanity as opposed to meeting the needs of the top 1%. Like, for example, we're going in this direction one way or the other. The question becomes who owns it. So Uber and Alphabet are fighting in court on vehicles, on automated cars. And in fighting in court over this notion of automated cars, well, you can understand what's going to take place right off the bat. All of those guys are going to lose their jobs. There's no point in having a human being driving from point A to point B, eating into your profits as meager as they pay their people, but still eating into their profits when you can have a robot to do it. Doesn't complain, doesn't bitch, doesn't get blue, doesn't call in for work because his girlfriend or boyfriend cheated on him. None of that stuff. It just goes and it does what it does. And if you add a solar power component to it, it does it automatically. It is a little cash machine. People would hit their cell phones, they get in it. There's no driver. It just goes automatic from point A to point B and vice versa. It can do that in perpetuity. But all those guys have lost their jobs. All those cab drivers lose their jobs. All of those truckers will lose their jobs. If those people can save a nickel, they will save a nickel. And that's exactly what they're going to do. And the reason why automated cars is getting the boost that it's getting. I guess my point is the question becomes who owns that? If a top 1% owns that, that's a further expropriation of wealth, not to mention the firing of the individuals in the process. They've done nothing wrong. They've been doing their jobs, but just kind of like a horse and buggy scenario being replaced by a car. You have a sea change from technology. Fresco's thing is, you know, as long as this stays in the hands of the 1%, this will be a weapon against the middle class and the poor. And the issue is who owns the technology, not so much the technology itself. It should be a freeing mechanism, kind of like Thanos. Like Thanos has his glove. And because of the way Thanos was raised, Thanos comes to the conclusion, yeah, I have this glove that can affect space, matter, time, and you know, all this other stuff.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Could you just define Thanos or explain Thanos?
Thanos. Oh, you know, from the Avengers, the movie, the Avengers movie. Thanos, he's a character in Marvel's comics, and he gets his hand on this Infinity Gauntlet. The gauntlet has control of space, matter, time, so the works. Essentially, in the comics, he usurps eternity itself. That's how powerful Thanos becomes.
He's like Galactus.
Yeah, right. And he comes to the conclusion, he says, you know, the way to deal with this universe, because we have all of these people who are starving, is to just get rid of half of the universe. And it's like, what? It's like you have control of space, matter, and time, and your conclusion is to knock off half the universe. But that's kind of what we do, right? Technology has this capability to essentially free humanity of its main issue, labor. And instead of it using it for those terms, we don't use it for those terms. We use it for the terms of maximizing the wealth of a tiny, small majority. And we have a society in the same way that they believed in kings and queens, acquiesce to a system that allows essentially the expropriation of wealth and labor to the top.
You remind me of, I'm sorry, that also reminds me of kind of in a weird way. Remember Valerie Solanas, the Scum Manifesto? She was the chick who I shot Andy Warhol. Well, Manifesto, she wrote about this world like that where machines would do everything, except her plan was kill all the men.
Right.
Other than that, it was a very similar
a plan, a strategy of solving the world's problems. Yeah. I mean, that's always a fascinating thing, right? It's like the trolley issue. If you could knock off half of the world or part of the world. Let's say you kill part of the population in order to get the other population to kind of say, yeah, we need to solve our world's problems. Is it worth knocking off part of the population? It's like the thing in Watchmen.
I would
But
say I'm sorry, knocking off the world, that's a heavy statement, because I would say there may be a percentage of the 1% that says, hey, maybe at some point, since we're pursuing this neoliberal system, instead of fixing it so we can support a world of 10 billion, 20 billion, 40 billion, maybe we just need to figure out a way to off half the population, maybe through starvation or uh, uh, hostile environmental conditions of climate change, things like that. Do you think I'm being too conspiratorial, or do you think that's potentially possible?
so it's not that I think you're being conspiratorial. I think of it in terms of where are the incentives? Like where do the incentives lead? Like what is the most ideal scenario from the standpoint of people in regards to what they want to accomplish? From it, we have a society that says maximize your profit. And in maximizing your profit, one of the ways to do that is technology. I mean, when they're screaming for $15 an hour minimum wage, okay, the moment that you get a machine that can flip those burgers for $14.95, that machine is going to replace those workers. It's not because they're horrible people, even though to some degree I think they may be horrible people. It's more so that that system says do X, and you get a feedback of profit saying that what you've done is somehow successful. And a system like that, why wouldn't they essentially try to, let me say it this way, the power of workers in a system like that becomes less the further time goes on where that system persists. Meaning, the further along you get where technology is essentially doing more and more and more of the labor, well, you need workers less and less and less. In which case, these plans where you have a top 1% that is kind of in their own enclaves, and this other mass of people who are just kind of poor and shit and piss and whatnot, becomes more real. Like if their goal is to create more and more profit. Now, there may be systems in place, or there may be revolutions in place. I mean, FDR, even Teddy Roosevelt, were very keen on this notion that at a certain point, they flip out. And I would argue that what's taking place now is people flipping out to some degree. I don't think Trump is, just kind of a magical president in the way he got in office. I think he gets in office because people are sick of the way the system is. And putting somebody like Clinton in essentially persists the system the way it is without really any real change. Like, think of it in terms of if Clinton gets in office, does anything really change in the way the world is? Not so much. And that system of technology moving in a particular direction, she will protect a certain class of people. The media will protect a certain class of people, and the people who are struggling and trying to make ends meet are getting worse off. And so you can kind of see that movement. That's why I don't think it's conspiratorial per se. It's one of those things where a system kind of trends in a particular direction.
I think it's a natural evolutionary process of capitalism going into end stage capitalism,
right,
almost devouring itself. It's devouring everybody else, and then at some point it just devours itself and implodes.
Yeah, right. Because otherwise it's like, where else does it go? In a weird way, the Green New Deal is almost like a capitalistic expansion. It's like it's clawing to try to get some level of expansion. Even the Space Force stuff comes across in a weird way as that in a military sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's eating itself. I mean, in real terms, like, and again, I keep making the point. The issue is not technology. The issue is not technology. The issue is ideology. It's almost like a religious belief. I mean, because for all intents and purposes, is there really that much of a difference between capitalism or democracy or any of these kind of iconography things or these ideas and religious beliefs? We create a distinction between the two, but ultimately we're talking about a system that is literally destroying the planet itself. ExxonMobil, to show you religious devotion, ExxonMobil knew in the 80s that what they were doing was going to destabilize the climate. And their response was, yeah, man, we need to bury this report. This is going to get in the way of our profits. We're talking about destroying the planet itself. And their role is like, yeah, this is going to hurt our bottom line, man. We need to bury this thing. If that's not devotion, I don't know what is.
Let me just add to what you said there. You're right. That's a very profound analogy comparing the religion to politics, because there are a lot of similarities. And maybe since we're saying this thing is destroying itself, maybe we could call it a religious death cult.
Yeah, right. It's look, people always ask me, they're like, what are you? Like, in a label sense, like, are you a socialist? Are you independent? Are you a libertarian? All this stuff. Um, I don't know what I am if I'm anything. I think I trend towards this notion that people need to be taken care of in general, and that any notion of freedom kind of demands a society that allows it. Like, being free to die on the street without healthcare is nonsense. Or being free in a system where you have these plutocrats who could essentially run roughshod over everyone else. This unaccounted for dominance of the 1%. That's not freedom in the least. Even schooling, like, how do you have understanding of the world if you can't get something that gives you a decent perspective from which, and contextual perspective to which to explain it or understand it? Education, healthcare, all of those things become crucial to having any notion of freedom. And those aren't things that you in and of yourself can provide. That takes a society around you in order to provide those things. How that's done becomes the question and the debate and everything else to me. But at the very least, that should be done. Even housing, like your ability to live somewhere. People, if you are getting paid $15 an hour, or let's say $14 an hour, but your healthcare is taken care of, your education is taken care of, and you have public transportation that is not laborious, where you can get from point A to point B, your life is not all that entirely miserable. I mean, there are things that you may need, don't get me wrong, but a strong social setting provides the context by which a person can live a decent life. That's what I want. Now, how that's provided, that's more of a political thing of arguing and haggling over.
Well, let's touch on that point because that's important. Yeah. What you've just laid out, I mean, we are in total agreement. Let's have a baseline where everybody is comfortable. And then if entrepreneurs want to make some money, as long as they're not suppressing us, do your thing, man. But let us at least have we have the technology now to have a beautiful quality of life.
Yes.
Everybody, let's just have that as a baseline. And then, maybe there's competition and evolution. So you want to do your thing and keep going, but just let everybody be cool.
And by the way, I've grown on this point because initially I think I was more in the Jack Fresco camp, this notion of, get rid of cash and all this other stuff. And I probably do trend there, but but I realize, there's certain sectors that I don't want business touching. There's certain areas where I don't want markets touching because I think they're private interests. Like our public interest matters more. Like, so health, like energy sector is not something I necessarily want people trying to make a buck on. That's something I want people to be able to get access to and provide it for and that type of thing. And we as a public trust or as a community somehow, whatever that arrangement is, deal with it. Healthcare, same thing. Now, if you want to have restaurants, have at it. If you want to have some of these other industries, have at it. There'll be certain regulations around it. But for me, it's like, have your fun in certain areas, but it doesn't necessarily need to affect all areas. And in areas that are vital sectors where the public matters more, those are sectors that we cut off. I strongly agree with you on that point.
100%. But okay, so we're in agreement. We have this point of agreement, very strong. The question is, how do we get there?
Yes, that's always the question.
Now, that is the $1 million question. Do you feel that we could get there through the voting booth, or do you think because the Citizens United has corrupted the system so much, most of the voting booths have been outsourced to Diebold, there's such a strong control over this electoral process?
Yeah.
Is there any hope anymore through politics of getting any change?
So I think two things are true. I think, and it goes beyond the voting booth, right? I mean, you have companies that drop billions of dollars. Like, ultimately, Gramsci had this question: why the hell do people support things that are dramatically against their own interests? Mm-hmm. And when somebody comes out and advocates and says, hey, let's change this, and let's change this in a way that is advocated for, let's say, the 99%, because, it's 99% of them, that they don't necessarily support those in full mass. It's like people are cognitively captive to the system itself to which they find themselves. And to some degree, you can understand that. People don't necessarily like disorder. And oftentimes when people are in systems, they make minute changes from point A to point B, and it's not something major. And not knowing, as opposed to being in something that even if it's somewhat corrupt, is something that people kind of still go with until it gets to be bad. The ability to drop billions of dollars into a campaign with this notion that cash is the same thing as speech is atrocious. That is astonishing. They even say that with a straight face. This notion of money equals speech is absurd. It's like property. It's like saying my house equals speech. It does not. That said, I don't think it's impossible. And I don't think you can do it purely through elections, meaning you need both. Like you do need this kind of this pressure on the political space to get that political space to acquiesce to your demands. And right now, there's a complete disassociation between politics and between what the public wants. I like to say you have dollars or pitchforks. And right now, you only have dollars. You have people who are struggling. They're trying to make ends meet. And in doing so, going out there and protest is not necessarily the thing that they have all that much time to do. And I would even argue that I don't even know if this public thinks in those terms anymore like they used to. I mean, it's almost the atomization of the public.
While you're on that point, let me even interject something with what you're saying. They have laws now that they want to put people in jail for like 20 years for protesting. If you wear a mask, you could get like some heavy jail time. So they've even gone beyond working people on a hamster wheel so they're too tired to do it. But if you do it, the laws that they're trying to put on the books could, you could get some heavy.
It's even worse. So under Obama pushed through the what is it, NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. But in it, he put in a provision that would allow military to be on home soil. Now, this was after Occupy Wall Street. Chris Hedges took him to court over this. Right. Chris Hedges won that case. And then the Obama appealed, but their argument was, Chris Hedges doesn't have standing to bring this case. Why the hell doesn't he have a standing? He's an American citizen challenging his government. And yet they're saying he doesn't have standing to bring this case. It's very possible that law was already into effect. And this other thing was just kind of an after effect to it. And look, I do think in a political sense, it is possible to change. I mean, there have been changes in our political space. I mean, fuck's sake, we had slavery at one point. Yeah. We were out there massacring and murdering Native Americans at one point.
But let me say this, what transitioned us out of slavery was a civil war. That
is true. That is true.
You talk about true. Change sometimes requires some heavy stuff, man.
So let me rephrase it. Change is possible even within the context of not necessarily having a major war. Now, the catch becomes how much change is possible without the context of having something major to allow that change to take place. I mean, the Russian Revolution took place in the middle of a war. Like all those shakeups take place when the state is at its weakest. And in the case of the Russian Revolution, the state was at its weakest. Even right now, if you're looking at France, they tried to ignore the fact that the Yellow Vest movement has been out there for 8 months? These guys are out there pushing hard. They're clearly bothered. When people get together like that, those things tend to evolve. You can get change. Our political apparatus is corrupt. Yes. It's rusted. Yes. But it's still there. It's still there. And if you have enough people pushing on it, not to mention somebody like Sanders, who I understand people say he's not a socialist, and fair enough. But what he wants is a fundamental sea change than what has taken place in my lifetime. Like probably he's talking about a transformational thing. And he's not taking money in this process. And so it's almost like you are voting for him in this case. It's like you are the one that's putting him in office. You're the one that kind of puts this thing. That's a change. Now the catch becomes, does the Democratic Party tick to the left in lieu of that? Kind of like the way they tick to the right with Bill Clinton. And does that change create like an FDR moment where what it means to be a Democrat shifts and what, the candidacies and all these other things? Because honestly, if Sanders is there and he's a Democrat, what the hell are the other Democrats? It becomes almost what's the point of you in a two-party system? Yeah, right.
Well, they are, let's be honest.
Yeah. So, I mean, Obama, Clinton, all of these are a similar type, these third-way Democrats. So what happens if it shifts? And what happens when this other part of the party that they thought was long gone, that they thought, was far away and that wasn't taking part of the party is now there and the public is supporting them and people know that they're popular. Like that's a political shift, but that political shift doesn't really mean anything in the sense of Sanders being there by himself if he doesn't have a public to push it. Sanders, if you listen to him, one of the things he keeps saying is, I'm pushing for this, but I can't do it by myself. Because he knows that those dinosaurs in office have zero incentive or want to push that stuff that he's talking about. Because despite him not taking cash, all of them to some degree are corrupted. There may be some that may go for this notion of Medicare for all, but there will be billions and billions of dollars spent lying, bombshelling the public, which is lies on this stuff. And so, it's possible, yes, because I don't think they would be spending money if it wasn't. You know what I mean? Like it's almost the very opposition itself kind of gets across that the thing that they're opposing is possible. It's almost like a dialectic. The very fact that you're opposing me shows that the thing that I'm pushing for is a possibility. I think it's that. And he's clearly serious about it. I mean, he's been pushing for this stuff, what, 30 years, 40 years?
Yeah.
His entire political life. So yes, I think it's possible, but with the caveat, only possible if you have mass support for it.
You bring up an interesting point, because you're right. History has shown you're not going to get like a one Jesus Christ savior type thing. It's got to be a political leader with a mass of people behind.
Yes.
Just one person cannot change the system. It's too entrenched.
Otherwise, it's pointless. Yeah, I mean, it really does. I mean, and in the context of trying to get this stuff passed, he, for all intents and purposes, would be literally running against his own party. Yeah. And at some point should. I mean, let's be honest, the party is corrupt as all hell. Yeah. I mean, they literally cheated a guy in the last election. You can read Donna Brazil's thing where they're outright talking about rigging.
She admitted it. She admitted
it. And Elizabeth Warren comes out, they rigged it. And then that's an awesome interview, by the way. That's one of the funniest interviews. Like that's like in my liked video list, where Elizabeth Warren is asked by the reporter from PBS, Donna Brazil's book is alleging some serious things. I mean, they said they rigged it. Do you think they rigged it? I think they did. And then there's just silence, like nothing. It's like 4 seconds of just dead air. Like, you know, you never have dead air in television. There's like dead air. And then a woman says, that's a powerful charge.
Yeah.
That's a powerful charge. It's a big deal. And
people then she for that shit.
Yeah, right. And then she comes back and walks back later. Yeah. And it's like, well, you cheated the guy. So there's nothing wrong. He needs to run against the party. He should. I mean, if you're being an earnest arbiter in this process, yes. I mean, I don't believe anybody else in that process can do it, only because nobody else has that mass support like that. Like he is literally going into the process with the notion of an army. About my wife is working with this woman who's part of the volunteer thing. He's doing this every state, like all of these districts and everything else. It's not so much that everything Sanders does I necessarily agree with, but this goes with how do you get from point A to point B? And Hillary Clinton, to me, just enshrined the system the way it was. Thus, for whatever fault Sanders has, takes it to that way. Like, as you drag the country to the left, you're dragging the Republican Party to the left, and you're dragging the discussion to the left. The discussion never stops or rests anywhere. There is no utopia per se. You're always kind of in this just kind of influx in this thing of what human history is, meaning there's no way to go back to, and you're always just in this process of going. Time ticks. And so his pushing to there allows you to get more gains and instantiate your gains. Like think of FDR, the New Deal. We're still talking about the New Deal today. That's like 80 years later. FDR is an icon to this day. We're talking about like 80 years later. Yes, he was instrumental in working with the Soviets and all these guys to win the war. But the domestic programs was the thing that FDR is really known for. I make the point that iconography is used by the Democratic Party, even though they don't live up to the iconography.
Let me hit something on that FDR, because that's an important point.
Yeah.
During FDR's time, FDR was a plutocrat. And
he was.
Plutocrats and said, look, there's going to be a revolution. Hitler's in Germany. We got Stalin in the Soviet Union. We got to give some people some shit, or this shit could go down.
That's a damn good point. Because, you know, when we think about it and we look back at history, from FDR's standpoint, the Soviet Revolution had just taken place. Like it had only taken place, it was only like 10 years or so. And in that context, so 20 years, I'm sorry. Yeah, 10, 20 years, but firmly within his lifetime, it's like us in the Iraq War. Like we clearly know the tenets of the Iraq War, and he knows, he's well learned why that revolution took place. Under the terms of that revolution, he also knew that Germany was in mode for a revolution also. Germany was barely keeping itself together during that time. And FDR said, yeah, you guys need to give me the ability to give away some shit. Otherwise, that may come
save their necks.
Yeah, right. He said, his thing, what did he say? I saved capitalism.
Yeah,
like, sure. You know, when people say Bernie Sanders is a socialist, I'm like, get out of here. He's not talking about nationalizing the railways.
But that, right, that leads me to the second part of my question. FDR, it was a different America. People, you know, you had rural police departments. There was no standing army.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we are the Roman Empire. We have the biggest and most deadliest surveillance system in history, one of the biggest militaries. do you think that maybe the plutocrats today are no longer fearful like they were in FDR's time, and they don't have they're not as incentivized to make any changes? What's your viewpoint on that?
That's a really interesting point, right? I used to wonder when I was looking back at history, how did that stuff come to pass? Like, how do you fall into fascism or these other environments? And you kind of see it kind of in living history, just in the way we go about it, where it's like there's a flux, there's chaos, the mass of people are pissed off because the mass of people realize they're being shafted and screwed, and their political apparatus is not seeing to their needs. And you have a rich class who is willing to support somebody who will stop that other class, this competition of the classes of sorts, for getting in office. Meaning, you'd screw over Lula in Brazil in order to take on the fascist Bolsonaro. Not so much that you like the fascist Bolsonaro, but you would accept that fascist if that fascist keeps your money intact. And you see something like that in the US, where people sometimes, not so much that they love Trump. I mean, 60% didn't think he was competent to even do the job. It was more so that they were like, no more Clinton. And they were really against this notion, meaning they would accept something that is against their interests in order to rebuke something that is kind of this kind of forced position on them. Meaning the Democratic Party, where there's nowhere else to go stuff. And they say, yeah, we do have somewhere else to go, even if it's not to our best interest. A militarized police force, a massive surveillance state, and all this other stuff. And, whether Sanders or anybody that gets in office can unravel that, I am massively skeptical of whether that could be just unraveled, especially in one administration. And especially, again, without the public being pissed off. But the public doesn't seem to care. I do think they consider their wealth and use that wealth for political ends. And insofar as they've been able to kind of get the public quiet and asleep and having this kind of political circus that goes on, for the most part, I think they're somewhat dejected. But I think we're seeing something different. They're engaging directly in the political process. Like what's her name? The Voice. She's a billionaire. She's just been giving a bunch of money to the party, and now she's in it. It's like, so instead of them being content to just give money, they're like, all right, now we're going to get in on this. Not to mention, while in this process, Standing Rock was a wake-up call. You have police. We're paying their salary, bashing the heads of indigenous Native Americans on our buck. We're paying for that. And these guys are just out there praying and protecting their land. I have to be honest, I am less optimistic on that front. Like, I don't know how you unravel that. I mean, Donald Trump says we're getting out of Afghanistan, and they flip out. They lose their mind. Trump fires John Bolton. And the resistance welcomes John Bolton to the resistance, saying stuff like, Trump has sided with North Korea over Bolton and fires Bolton. And you're like, what? John Bolton's a lunatic. You should be happy, whatever. I don't care if Vladimir Putin was riding on a bear while on a cell phone saying, get rid of him. I don't care. I just want him out of the office. The world is a brighter and better place with John Bolton gone. And these guys are, it's derangement. I don't know how you unravel that. And the sad part is, this is one of those things that Democratic Party and Republican Party have walked into hand in hand. The American public, blissfully unaware and seemingly not all that much caring about it. It's astonishing. I don't know how you unravel that. And maybe the problem with a lot of the stuff, like, this notion of transitioning into a better society, is stuff like that. Like, how do you unravel processes that were put in place over the course of like 20 years? How do you do that? And certainly you can't do it in like one term.
Longer than 20, go back to the military industrial complex after World War II with Eisenhower, then his warning, his prescient warning about what would happen. And then the assassination of JFK, which, might have involved, I'm not going to, that would take 3-hour discussion, but this is
from incentives. It does make sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, you have an industry that is built up during World War II. I mean, a massive, massive, massive industry. Like, it's hard to get across. We were literally arming the world, like not just our own military force, meaning we were putting troops on both sides of the globe. We were also arming Britain and the Soviet Union, like an astonishing array. And then they're like, yeah, man, poverty is God made. What? You're telling me that we have the ability to have factories and technology marshaled to the cause of arming the entire world. However, poverty is beyond our control. It's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. It's aggravating even when people say stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, arming the world. Oh, that's your side. I'm sorry.
That's a sirens outside my window.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough.
I'm in New York City.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Yeah, man. We were arming the world at one point. And so this notion of poverty is utter nonsense. What was the question again? I'm sorry. The
siren threw me off too. Sorry. And I could see the light, so I was kind of hypnotized for a minute.
My bad.
All right. So the point, we were just talking about how it would be hard to just unravel this permanent surveillance state. You know.
Right, incentives. After World War II, all those industries were built up in order to fund the war effort. And so those guys will be able to make a ton of cash because, again, they were funding the war effort. Well, what happens when the war ends? You know, those guys are either going to draw down or they're going to find some other reason to ship their things. Because from the standpoint of business, they look at it in terms of profits. Well, our profits is going to go down if we draw down. You know what I mean? So from all incentive standpoint, wars are good for business. Sure. So we have a military budget now that's in $1 trillion. That's nearly $1 trillion if you add in other factors. $1 trillion a year. And we have no enemy. Like, we're not fighting a large scale war. We're hunting people down in caves and that type of stuff. And yet they're trying to justify this massive budget. It's a jobs program for all intents and purposes. And those companies suckle at the tit of the US taxpayer. And you question whether or not this stuff is needed. Who knows? Who cares? From the standpoint of congressmen, they don't want to draw down in their district because those are jobs that are being lost in their districts. From the standpoint of military contractors, the last thing they want to do is for the government to not fund this. You know, every bullet that they drop, every bomb that they drop, those things are things that have to be replaced. So from the standpoint of war, as a racket, it is a damn good racket from the standpoint of profits. Right. Like, I guess the point is, it's gross incentives. Like, the incentives in this case is for people to maximize their profit at the expense of the taxpayer while scaring the public into believing that there's some specter and enemy out there while simultaneously creating that enemy in the behaviors that we take on. Like, Eisenhower was right. I mean, that speech is prescient, like nobody's business. It's an amazing speech. It has such a gravity to it.
Yeah, it's haunting.
But I do think change is possible. Like, I'm not one of those people who are like utterly dejected by this and, oh, the political process doesn't work, or I don't have that belief. I do have that belief. One or two things is true. Either change is possible in a political sense, or we're talking about a revolution. You can't have it both ways. Like, it's either order or not. There's no in between it. There may be a situation where you put massive amounts of pressure on the political institution and the various people where it scares the shit out of them, in which case, you know, they change in that sense, meaning the politicians start to take on the temperament of the audience. John Boehner goes to a Tea Party rally, and John Boehner sees this audience that's pissed off and angry and hateful. And he's like, we're going to fucking win. And he was right. Because he saw something. Those people were angry. You know what I mean? Like, change is possible. And the Tea Party did have an effect on the political space. It wasn't a positive one, but it was there. People like Rand Paul pushing, you know, against wars and those type of things. I do think change is possible, but I don't think it can be done purely in a political space. It's both.
We'll probably have to end on that because I know you do have to attend an important political event.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't want
to have a little bit more time. You're not right.
Why don't you signal me when you got to leave? Just
no. We can go to 6:45. There's a Sanders debate party that's here. My wife works with the team, so I was going to go with them to the debate party. It's funny. It's always weird. I don't go with the Sanders thing. I'm not in the camp because I don't want to, when I do the show, there are times where I ding Sanders because he says something that I didn't like, brings up the Russia stuff. And it's like, oh God, dude, you're working against your best interest, even though I understand why you do it.
I think also Venezuela, he was kind of,
he was dodgy on that. He was like flaky on it. It wasn't so much, he's doing a two-step. I understand why he's doing a two-step, because he knows that this election, if he gets in, is going to be about socialism versus capitalism. That literally is going to be the drawdown. And that is not something you can hide from. You can't run from it. You run from it, they're going to chase you your whole life. And running from something looks worse as opposed to standing there in a certain degree of, dignity and defending the point. It's not so much that the American audience is on board entirely for the socialism thing. It's just that you can't run from that thing. You're identified by it. You're identified with it. So he is to fight on those grounds to some degree. So any association or strong association with Venezuela Donald Trump is going to be like, oh, he's trying to turn America into Venezuela, he's trying to turn America into Venezuela. Like, utter ludicrous. But again,
so you're saying it's a move on Bernie's part. It's a strategic move because he has to kind of protect himself from socialism charges, and you're going to turn the U.S. into like a failed socialist state.
That's exactly what it is. He has the blunt attack that he's friends to Maduro and all this other nonsense. Like that, it's a political thing, and it's an unfortunate political thing. I asked this question: how on earth is Venezuela a national security threat? As Obama said, because Obama started this. How is Venezuela a national? And to be fair, it's not even Obama started it, because beforehand, Hugo Chavez, they were trying to get him out of office. They tried to coup for Hugo. But the very basic question of how is, Venezuela a national security threat to the United States that has $1 trillion military budget, and Venezuela is barely keeping themselves together. And nobody ever just basically asked Obama that very basic, specific question, because I would be awesome to hear that answer. I don't know that answer to that question. And yet they were considered a national security threat. If Sanders comes out and says anything, all of the Western media has heaped all of this hatred on Maduro. Oh, he's a dictator. Oh, he's brutal. He's slaying his people in the streets. Missing the point that our clandestine activities in that particular region creates situations where there are showdowns with the cops. And they only show the showdown with the cop. They never show what started the showdown. Western media has a perspective on this stuff that goes in line with whatever the government wants, whether that's under Obama or Trump. Sanders can only go so far, and that type of that talking. And I hated it. I hit him on this because I was like, God, you're being wishy-washy on this particular subject. And I understand why you're being wishy-washy, but it's not my job to care about why you're being wishy-washy. I can explain it to the audience by the same token. I don't like it. Or like you said, the Russia stuff. And, the Assange stuff. I get it. Assange, he's running in a Democratic primary, and that stuff becomes toxic. And it's like, you're screaming about Russia when apparently, under your logic, Russia revealed that you were being cheated by the DNC. Like, it's so weird, it's so bizarre. But that's the weird two-step that he has of running this process. So
let me just hit that Assange thing. Do you think perhaps that's like, I realize maybe that in itself shows that he's operating too much in an Overton's window, where Assange is like, that is the line in the sand of free speech, journalism, a free society. If you can't come down on that, have you been pushed too far within the box? What do you think on that?
I understand where you're coming from. And look, I've often said Sanders is a horse that I'm riding in this race. Yeah. And I don't necessarily think he's a perfect man. I just think he's a man. Yes, he's been pushed. But it's this question of, it's a military thing, right? I mean, parties, for the most part, are just military campaigns. If there was a civil war, the Democratic Party would be one of the militaries, the Republican Party would be one of the militaries, and these guys will fight it out. They just do it in elections. This goal of getting elected is also almost a militaristic process. You have an objective. What is that objective? I want to get in office. How do you get in office? And then at that point, everything else is subordinate to trying to get in office. He is running in a Democratic primary full of conspiracy theorists and maniacs. And those honestly, Rachel Maddow gives them their heaping of Russia bait like every night. Trump and the Russians, Trump and the Iranians. Do you know one night she even said that Trump was working with the Iranians? And so I was like, what? Like she goes into one conspiracy theory after the next. But that's what
the Ayatollahs, like the Saudi king.
Right. But that's what I mean. That's what they want. That's what they're like, she juices them up. Yeah. And so you have this situation where these are the people that he has the peace. They hate his guts because he had the temerity to run in that race with Clinton. They hate Assange's guts because Assange revealed that all these Clinton emails that in and of themselves, if people looked at those emails and was horrified, then why are you getting mad that the emails were released? Clearly there was something in them that horrified them, then it made it clear information. But from their perspective, all of that stuff is toxic. Yeah. He is running in a race of conspiracy theories. Now, if he goes into the race and he says anything positive about Assange, he loses. Honestly, I don't. Do you foresee him going through the Democratic primary with a stance that, look, we need to, for example, he came out for press freedom and he came out with that bill trying to protect the press from billionaires and their influence, but not Assange. And like you said, Assange is a red line in the sand. And even questions of what would you do if you get in office for Assange? Will you kill the prosecution? I've never heard anybody even ask him that. That would be a fascinating question. Oh man, that would be a fascinating question. Nobody asked that question. I agree with you that it's a line in the sand, but it's a line in the sand only in a particular context. What is your goal? If the goal is to get elected, this is not one of those ways to do it. As much as I dislike it, it's just both things are true at once. It is a push in the sense of the Overton window, but it's also true that it is necessary movement in order to have any chance of getting elected. Because Democrats who already hate your guts, you're trying to. One of the guys, I work at a radio show, and the guy's a Democrat. He's a Democrat through and through. And he says, God, all of these people really hate Bernie Sanders. And I was like, dude, I don't know what your Twitter list look like, but not on my Twitter list. But that's my point. Like I look at Sanders and I think, God, man, it has to suck for him to go out there and say Hillary Clinton when he knows that he was cheated. And yet he toes that line because he realized if I'm having any chance in the election, this is the line I have to toe. Question becomes what happens after the primaries? Is he still cowed? And if he gets elected, is he still cowed? Like that's kind of where the question comes in on how much he's untethered himself from the party. I think the party is terrified because they think this guy is untethered from us. He's not taking our cash. And even though he's like cowed to some degree now in regards to what he can say, how strong he can go, at the point where he gets elected, he's untethered. The question becomes, what does that look like? I don't have an answer to that. Like it's a hard answer because the answer is dependent upon the person. Whether you think it's acceptable for the individual to take on a particular task to try to get elected, with this notion that if he does get elected, there's a cascade effect of all sorts of positive benefits from him getting elected. Does the end justify the means? Sometimes I think so, yes. That's an honest answer. It's like it depends on the person and whether or not they think that the thing with Assange matters more than pretty much anything else, or whether they think the issue with Assange matters more than trying to get elected. I don't like it. I think it sucks. But I don't think Sanders is a perfect man, and I accept the words and all. I understand.
Got it. And do you think Tulsi Gabbard is harming Sanders, or do you think
hell
no? Okay.
Hell no, fuck no. I don't. I got to be honest. I don't understand Sanders supporters that don't support Tulsi Gabbard. I don't get it. I like Tulsi, and I've liked Tulsi from the beginning of the campaign. My argument was the more lefties you have on stage, the better. You're going to have 20 Democrats, 17 of which are essentially clones of one another, and that are going to go out and essentially attack and repudiate everything that Sanders is putting out and try to get their quote unquote centrist solution to the stuff that Sanders is saying. That's literally what you were going to have. You knew you were going to have it, with the leader being Joe Biden. Joe Biden is essentially a walking corpse at this point. So you essentially have the other people on that stage essentially attacking, like Delaney. Delaney spending $21 million of his own money to attack Medicare for all. Think about that for the moment. Delaney is so rich that he could spend $21 million of his own money to tell you that we don't have the resources to ensure that everybody is covered. No, dude, we do have the resources. If you didn't have the $21 million that you just burned on the White House lawn, maybe we could, get a way of doing it. I like Tulsi. I think the more lefties on the stage, the better. And as evidence, Tulsi outright decapitated Kamala Harris's campaign in 60 seconds.
It was beautiful to watch.
Her finest moment. I don't know what else Tulsi Gabbard would do in her life, but I swear to God, that was her finest moment.
Have you ever watched the Flintstones?
Yeah.
Remember when Fred Flintstone, he was in Mr. Slade's office and he shrunk to little Fred Flintstone? He was so deflated and humiliated. His spirit was broken. That was Kamala Harris. You could just see her shrinking on that stage.
It was. And then she was spiteful and bitter at the end. Oh, she's an Assad apologist. She's a puppet. It's like, oh, don't be bitter.
Yeah,
don't be bitter.
Watch that.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. That's kind of my point. She annihilated Kamala Harris. And she's never said a bad word about Bernie Sanders because to some degree, part of her thing is I'm linked to him in a particular way. I got to be honest. I didn't think Tulsi Gabbard was going to win. So I never had this fear factor with Tulsi Gabbard. And even still, I thought the more lefties on that stage pushing back against the nonsense that they're going to be hit with, the better. Even with Elizabeth Warren being on stage for Sanders, I don't trust Elizabeth Warren as far as I can throw her.
Obama, I think she's another Obama, maybe like a hidden progressive clothing wolf. She'll do the bidding of the corporate elites when she gets in office.
You should see my last video. Yes. Because I try to make this point that, a lot of this stuff is so distrustful. Like, I'm not going to accept money in the primary, but I will accept it in the general election. And nobody ever asks her, wait a minute, why is it okay? Why, if it's unethical to accept money, why are you okay accepting it in the general? And not just that, if you're accepting it in the general anyway, why don't you go ahead and also accept it in the primary? Nobody ever asked that basic question. Is it true that you're accepting, you're doing the grassroots thing only in the primary because you're standing beside Sanders and you want people to think that you're one-to-one? That's the honest answer. I mean, otherwise it doesn't really make sense. I don't trust Elizabeth Warren at all. Like this notion of her standing up for people, the they rigged it thing, where she comes out and says, yeah, they rigged it. And then 2 days later, okay, they didn't rig it. Like,
let me give you a quick Elizabeth Warren story real fast. One time I was watching her grilling the Federal Reserve. I think it was Janet Yellen and those.
yeah.
So she's coming down. Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Blah, blah, blah. And as soon as the camera goes off, I don't know if she knew it was on. When it's over, she's there like laughing with the Federal Reserve people. They're joking around. It was like, oh, I was like, oh man, come on. After this whole presentation.
Evrendale torched her earlier. Elizabeth Warren essentially heard about a fundraiser that Joe Biden was throwing. I'm sorry, that Evrendale was throwing for Joe Biden. Evrendale was supporting Biden. And Elizabeth Warren came out and attacked her, essentially slammed her, saying, oh, the swanky event that these guys are hanging out with their big donor fundraisers. Evrendale hits back, calling her a hypocrite, saying you didn't mind taking my money last year, and now you're all of a sudden attacking me for this particular position. Do you know she padded her campaign? Like, she essentially had a political problem. How do I get from point A to point B? People are skeptical of candidates that are taking cash, and I need to get through that primary. However, when I am out of the primary, those people will have nowhere else to go. And the comparison is between me and Trump, and they're going to care about the fact that I'm taking all the money in the world less. My goal is just to get out the primary. And so she comes up with this political phrasing. I don't believe in unilateral disarmament. However, I am going to build a grassroots movement in the primaries. It's like, yeah, but if it's corrupting in the primary, why is it not corrupting in like, it just doesn't make sense. My thing is, if Warren, in many of the cases that people needed somebody to stand up for them, be it Standing Rock, that's a major deal. A woman self-identified as a Native American didn't stand up for Native Americans. They're out there blowing Native Americans' arm off. Obama is carving a turkey, talking about Thanksgiving, when real Native Americans were actually getting beat and shot with water cannons by cops taking their land. Warren didn't say squat about it. Only until Obama came out did she finally say something about it. I guess I'm making the point that, in many of the situations where you needed somebody to stand up for you, she didn't. And so it doesn't entirely make sense for me to support somebody who would not stand up for you. Also, her Medicare for All plan. Have you seen that? She just published her Medicare for All plan today.
I didn't see it.
Her Medicare for All plan is a quotation Medicare for All plan, because it's like, Medicare for All is a specific thing. It's everybody covered. It's a single payer. It's a gold star system. If you were living in a socialist country, the NHS would be jealous of it. You know what I mean? Like, Sanders is trying to knock it out of the park in the sense of government. And it's not even entirely government healthcare. I mean, ultimately, Medicare is paying everybody. Medicare is being an intermediary between the two. But whatever. Everybody's covered. Medicare for all. No insurers, or at the very least insurers in this kind of ancillary way. She puts out her plan and she doesn't mention the bill at all. Like, Medicare for All is a very specific bill, and Elizabeth Warren talks about it in these kind of roundabout political ways. Like, based on what she put in her document, Kamala Harris's plan would fit under what she's talking about. Any of the Democrats, for the most part, would fit under her plan. Any of the Democrats that had a quote unquote Medicare for All system. She's going with this notion that, in theory, I'm for Medicare for all. However, I'm also for these other pathways, which in fact are not Medicare for all. So yeah, I don't trust Elizabeth Warren as far as I could throw. However, on that debate stage, it was a positive, because in this theoretical defense of Medicare for all, she was defending it well with Sanders on the stage. Yeah. That's kind of what I mean. Like, it's better to have multiple people defending a position as opposed to having one, because it looks like the one is a radical and an outlier, as opposed to having multiple that can kind of make arguments in different ways to get more time. So yeah, I think Tulsi Gabbard is a benefit. I think she's only been positive in this race. She should have been on that debate stage. The third debate stage, they're being dodgy with the polls. And, this notion that the DNC is like, okay, we're going to go with polling, and they don't control the polling. So they don't control the frequency in which the polls are coming out. So a candidate may actually show momentum, but you may not be able to see it between the two debates because the number of polls are not coming out as needed. So, for example, the one that recently came out gave her the number that she needed to be on the debate stage. If it came out a few days before, she would have been on the third debate. She should have been on the debate stage. They're not going to do her any favors because, she stepped down last time for Sanders.
Crazy, man, crazy. How are you on time? Are you cool?
It is. Oh yeah, yeah. I got it. Yeah, let's call it quits. But hopefully, I mean, we were able to get decent talk. I'm sorry about the time frame. Yesterday on Tuesday, I have a radio show here in Richmond. It's called the Progressive Soapbox radio show, and I go for 2 hours at a station here. And so the time frame gets a little weird because I end up having to do multiple segments, which means I have to research in advance of the show and all this other stuff that's not done here. So Tuesday was a horrible day. So that's entirely my fault. I'm sorry for even mentioning Tuesday. I wasn't even thinking about it.
It's totally cool. I mean, I really dug the conversation. I think we hit on some good points, and I could go on talking about all the stuff and the Star Trek.
I hope I answered your questions, by the way. I know sometimes when I answer the question, it's not because oftentimes multiple things are true at once.
Absolutely.
It's like it's like, can Sanders get his agenda accomplished? Or can anybody get an agenda accomplished in the sense of public policy? Because I don't care if it's Sanders or anybody else. I just want policy accomplished. Yeah. And that's like yes or no. It's like, yes, if they have a certain degree of public support that can be galvanized with a political apparatus that is paying attention to it. Under Occupy Wall Street, if you remember, Obama comes out and says, yeah, I need somebody to make me do it. That famous speech between Martin Luther King and LBJ. Martin Luther King's talking about the policies that he needs for the civil rights movement, and LBJ's like, make me do it. Because the moment that you show a public will, you can kind of get this notion that, all right, fair enough. There's a lot of people in the public that believe in a particular thing. And even though I may not necessarily be in on it, I'm, having sex with my wife, I'm doing my job, I at the very least acknowledge as an American that this is out there taking place. And the popularity of it to some degree bring people on to a particular point of view. It's a weird thing that we have as human beings where we it's like riots and people almost take automatic behavior, but having groups influences people, just the very factor of the group itself. So in that sense, Obama is like, yeah, I need somebody to make me do it. This kind of iconic words. The Occupy Wall Street comes out. It's like, yes, we, the 99%, we need better wages and we need fairness. In regards, we need healthcare. We need all of these things. And Obama's like, yeah, fuck that. Get these people out there. And he crushed them. The federal government was working with local and state governments in order to crush those movements in the various places. He literally called for a movement. When he got that movement, squashed it.
Yeah.
Get out of here with that movement.
Yeah.
Get the hell out of here.
I think Obama was a Manchurian candidate from the get-go, in my opinion.
He was, because Obama had a particular way of speaking. Glenn Ford is right when he talks about this, where Obama would say something and then repudiate the thing that he said like a few moments later. It's like, we need to build a bridge in regards to dealing with climate change. It's an existential threat. It's going to tear down the world. There's an asteroid that's going to get the planet. However, we have energy needs that we need to attend to, and we need to ensure that we get our energy that's clean and safe. And ultimately what that means is I'm going to get as much oil as I could possibly get out of the ground while signing on to the Paris climate accord. Like, it's a two-step. Like, it's.
It's good. I mean, the guy is, I have to say, he's a brilliant communicator.
Yes, he is.
He's like slick. I mean, they picked, if he was groomed and prepared for this, they picked a very capable manager.
I just wish he was an advocate for us on that front. Like, honestly, I just wish he was that groove, smooth communicator. Because when Obama got in, he had a mandate. Yeah. I mean, in any real terms of a mandate, he stumped McCain in that first race. And not just beat McCain, it was like, oh my God, he's black. It's like all of it. It's like all of it was coming into fray, like, okay, this is a change. This is a change. He could have came up and says, you know what? I'm going to do a public option. Even that. But he got rid of that. He didn't push the legislative branch. He just kind of let them come up with the deal and all alone. The president's prerogative didn't necessarily come into
the Heritage Foundation, by the way, that whole.
Yeah, the Romney Care.
Romney Care, yeah. It was a Republican. It was a Republican play.
And then we're talking about like Citigroup picking the people in his cabinet and all this other stuff, while him simultaneously, browbeating the banks, while simultaneously being funded by the banks, throwing your body out in front of Wall Street. Like, I think my breaking point was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was the TPP. Yeah. It was so atrocious, and not just atrocious. In spite of the public saying no, he's out there running. Like, Hillary Clinton is doing her best to get away from it. She's like, no, I'm not for it. I'm not for it. I'm not for it. Now, everybody in their right mind knows that Hillary Clinton immediately is going to rework it, change a word or two, change a period, and say, okay, it's different.
It'll be the PTB or something. They'll just
right. She'll be like, all right, it's different now.
Yeah.
And she even alluded to such. The guys at her campaign alluded to such.
Yeah.
But she is trying to get away from it because she knows it's toxic.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, not to mention her last name is Clinton, meaning NAFTA, and all of those places was wiped out by NAFTA. Again, natural incentives. You have a company. That company makes a trade deal with something like China. China says, yeah, we allow you to make this stuff here. You can pay these workers $3 an hour. They were making $1 at first. Those workers are happy as a lot. You fire the American workers and you move your company over. And then the trade deal allows you to import that stuff without any tariffs on it. So, now they're browbeating China for something that American companies were perfectly in line with doing to make their profits.
Not to mention slave labor, which we now do, which we used to condemn China for. So,
yeah.
And we are like China in certain respects as far as totalitarianism.
What was the country? Was it Malaysia where Obama changed the ruling to allow them to be in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, even though they had like slave labor charges or something? Like it came out.
No, but Malaysia would certainly be a candidate for that.
It was one of those countries. Like it was one of those South Asian countries. But yeah, if you're talking about the Kamala Harris and the 8 cent away from slavery, where they have people kept in prison in order for labor, cheap labor, or even the Hispanics, the immigrants, where they have these private prison companies, and these guys, and you must understand the situation. You're in a situation where you're powerless. Like this notion of law and everything else doesn't apply to you. You've been disappeared from your particular society. And they say work. It is a private organization with every notice of trying to get profit. And somebody tells some alcoholic that's probably overweight to go work. And he said, go make that person work. And that person gets a paycheck. And because that person gets a paycheck, it goes out and then enforces the will of whoever's paying them on the immigrant. The intermediary between the two is the individual that has a job and that is getting paid to inflict a certain amount of hell on an immigrant that's in this particular society. And whether or not they get paid or not, whether or not they prosper in that job is purely dependent upon what they can do for those immigrants, meaning the force that they can apply to get those immigrants to do labor or anything else. This is a horrible situation to be in because you're right. It is a certain degree of slavery built into this process. It's horrendous. It's problematic to say the least. Obama, in this particular case, though, is an amazing politician. He had a mandate. I don't necessarily think, look, I think Sanders opened up a political space that wasn't there before. For the longest time, people like Obama and Clinton had essentially said, look, the moderates are the only way you could go. Because if you remember, Obama was supposed to be as progressive as you could go. And I'm just using the label as a catch term. I don't like these labels because these labels are sketchy. I just mean somebody who's to the left. It was like, this is as far to the left as you can go. And he's like, really? The guy dropped 26,000 bombs. Shit, what are you talking about? But that's what they said. That's what they coded him as. And so Obama gets in office and he's not. Hope and change. What does that mean? Nobody knows what that means. He comes out saying, all right, hope and change has been delivered. Thank you very much.
I think Obama won the 2008 Advertiser of the Year award. I think he beat out Nike and Apple when his campaign won the top advertising award.
It was an amazing campaign.
Yeah.
The only difference is people don't invest their hopes in Nike. Yeah. As much as, being able to jump and so forth. It was a confidence campaign. He won that campaign. He did an amazing job. He's an amazing politician.
Yeah, absolutely.
If he ran against Trump, he probably would have won that too. Do you think he would have beat Trump?
He might be one of the corporate Democrats who could have won.
I think so too. I think
maybe his first term. I don't know. After the third term, would like, let's just say hypothetically, people knew him already.
Well, by the third term, I even think he could have won the third term. I think he's an amazing politician. Like, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying this is like his policies. I'm saying this is purely in the politics of it, like the politic. Like he probably would have been like, we're going to expand Medicare for all for some. Actually, I don't know. The TPP stuff is toxic. Like it really is. It's toxic.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm torn on this. I think he would have won, but I think the Democrats would have fell in line for him.
I'm not so sure.
Go for it.
If it was let's assume it was a fair election. No interference from voting. Diebold voting booths or anything like that.
Yeah.
Fair election. Hillary Clinton beat Trump in the popular vote. Assuming
that was California. California had like 3 million more votes. Like if you looked at the country was red. And then you get to California, and California has she wins by 3.8 million votes.
Yeah.
So her entire total that she got was from California.
Yeah. All right. So that taken into account, Obama did that thing with the Flint water where he pretended to drink it. I think he lost a lot of credibility with working people.
Yeah,
he had initially, and Trump still might have won.
I think Trump could have won. I'm torn on this one, and I got to be honest, I'm not sure. I mean, part of me thinks that Obama is. See, the thing is, like, you're right. In the first two terms, they know who he is. You know, like, it's not like you can't run that hope and change campaign in the third term. Hell, you could even run it the second term. Like, it was just grim determination. This guy's a plutocrat. Vote me in, otherwise he's gonna rape you blind.
Yeah.
And that became the campaign. I suspect that would have been something similar with a different message. I suspect Obama would have ran a different message. Like Clinton ran a tone deaf campaign, and even in that tone deaf campaign,
I'm with her. What does that mean? I'm with her. Where? Yeah. About right. What?
Like if he ran it like it was my turn and those type of things, that type of stuff, that turns people off, man. And then you cheat Sanders. Like there was a lot of stuff that happened in that election that was just utterly toxic. And so you had what, 20-30% of people who voted for Obama went to Trump. Like, I don't know. And that's, that's sad. This guy was a reality show host. And, it's hard to know whether or not you could beat him, like even with Obama.
I think almost in a way, Trump reflects the mass consciousness of the United States. In other words, you were talking about hyper-capitalism before. Yep. So we have a reality TV star kind of like playing this, real estate genius writing, ghost books are ghost written. It's like a show. And yeah. That's maybe Trump represents the show of where we're at, the spectacle of politics, this theater of the absurd. And maybe Trump is the collective consciousness of the United States right now.
It is. And, like they say, history rhymes, even if it doesn't repeat. This happened before. Ronald Reagan was a cowboy. Yeah. And remember, they were like, that idiot. Like, it's hard to remember that stuff. I wasn't around during that time. I was like a kid. I was like, I remember Ronald Reagan, coming on television, telling me about how the buck stops with him and the Iran-Contra affair. And the video goes off and you're looking at the video like, what just happened? Like the president just admitted to some kind of war crimes. He says, I wasn't aware of this. However, I'm just bringing this out now that, the Iran-Contra affair has come to light. Reagan was a cowboy. He was in those old cowboy movies. And in those old cowboy movies, they're like, there's no way this idiot can win. There's no way this idiot can win. Oh my God, this idiot won.
He was a good actor. I mean, he was a B actor, but in the political arena, he was actually a pretty good actor.
Yeah, right. And I guess that's the point. Yeah. The weird thing with Trump is that Trump breaks all of these conventions of stuff that you weren't supposed to be able to do and weren't supposed to be able to get away with. And again, I think you're right. It's this mass consciousness of we've been led astray. Yeah. And there's an established class or established order of things that is part of the problem in this case. Like, I think people realize something is wrong. Like, the system shouldn't be this way. Like, things shouldn't be this difficult, this much wealth that's generated. When you ask people how much wealth is generated, like the distribution, they always get it wrong. And the skew is always worse than what they think it is. And even from the standpoint of where they think it is, they're still like, taxes need to be increased. There should be public services. There should be Medicare for all. I don't think people are insane for saying that their life should be better, especially in a context where there's no purpose to life. You make your own purpose. Your government literally doesn't exist. It's not real. It's a thought thing. It's something that you can form to, depending on the environment, to get accomplished what you need to accomplish. People don't look at it in those terms, though. They look at it as if it's this kind of fixed thing, like you go to DC in the White House and that's your government. That's not so much. If the White House was nuked, your government will still be in existence. It may be broken to some degree, but it will still be there. It's just an idea. It's an iconography that 300 million people essentially accrue around. This idea is in order to keep people together. Change is possible. I mean, like I said, the governmental apparatus conforms and changes when people realize that it needs to conform and change. And it can be what you want it to be. It's not a fixed entity. And that is one of the hardest arguments sometimes is to make to people, because they argue from this position as if, well, capitalism is this, or democracy is this, or republicanism is this. And they have all of these labels and all of these ideas associated with labels.
Aren't you kind of seeing the Hegelian dialectic? In other words, so you'll have a force counterforce.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at, and it's which force is stronger, really. So it's all that's going to fail.
I mean, it seems like there's a saying that the failure of the right or the failure of the left is the rise of the right. That if people had a left-wing option, they would choose the left-wing option. But sometimes you get into these political fights where the fight takes place and the left kind of ends itself, in which case the right just kind of steps in the void. Neoliberals not necessarily wanting to attend to the needs of the public itself, in which case, like, look at the race now. You have Sanders running in the race, Warren running in the race, and Biden running in the race. Biden is barely alive, and he is running in that race. And I mean, he's kind of out of it. He's a shadow of his former self. And so the goal becomes stop Sanders. How do we stop Sanders? Despite the fact that Sanders, if you want to maintain the system, is probably the person that you want to put in that office. I mean, if we're being honest, if you're talking about getting money to the bottom, a part of the electorate where they could spend and kind of refurbish capitalism, he's your guy. And yet that's the guy that they want to stop. Kind of like during FDR's time, a traitor to his class. He saved your class, buddy. But again, they don't connect it in those terms. They want to get as much as they can possibly get. They want to maximize their profit. And Sanders coming in saying, yeah, there's a contract. It is impossible for you to be a millionaire and billionaire without this person buying your product or working at your store, without you having clean air, roads, all that stuff. At which point there needs to be a balance in regards to the, you could say, social contract.
Well, it's like Henry Ford said, I've got to pay my workers enough so they could buy the car.
Yes.
If I underpay too much, nobody's going to buy these cars.
Who's going to buy the car? Right. Who's going to buy the product when the factory has been shipped to China and you fired your workers? It's a basic contradiction in capitalism.
Right.
I mean, it really is this thing of like the Green New Deal in an odd way, even though it's being pushed by lefties, it is a new expansion of capitalism.
Sure.
And I honestly think the Space Force stuff is the same thing. You know, this notion of, all right, we need to find other places to spend money on shit that we don't necessarily need. It's like, hey, what about feeding that person? Yeah, that's nice, but can we just put some shit in space? It's like it's maddening to me that we have all of this technological capability. Like, nobody needs to be hungry, and the technology is not used in that way. And trying to make the argument to people that do, there's no point to life. Your point is whatever you got to make that point to be. And the moment that you have the technology where you can change and revolutionize your society to the very least attend to the very basic needs of the individual. If you want to do this capitalism stuff, do that shit on the, up there. But at the very least, the basic needs of the individual should be attended to, especially libertarians, when they push this notion of freedom. It's like their notion of freedom is a little off if you don't necessarily have this idea that that individual is to some degree taken care of. And I don't mean taken care of in the sense that all of his needs are met. I just mean he's within the context of a society where he has a sense of purpose in what he's doing. There is no sense that that individual is ever going to go without. And when he makes the decision to do something, it is his choice to do it. He's not being compelled to do it because he's going to die hungry in the street if he doesn't do it. It's like you could work on a plantation, but you need to choose your plantation. What about just not having people work on plantations? Right. Especially when you have the technological capabilities to fix it. But on that, I am going to leave because I'm running my mouth and I have a bad tendency to run my mouth.
We'll have all your YouTube and connection information in the description box for those of you who want to, connect with Jamarl and,
Progressive. And I'm taking that jersey, man. I am taking the jersey. So.
All right, cool deal. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it much. And, have a great experience tonight.
Absolutely, man. It should be fun. I am hoping it goes well. This is one of those things where I keep making, debates are like Punch and Judy stuff. It's just theater. It's just acting, so it's political theater. But it does have merit. I mean, it has a value. Or whether it has, let me say that again. Two things are true. It is Punch and Judy. It is just political theater. By the same token, it's what people judge other politicians by. Both are true. When Kamala Harris put a knife in Joe Biden, she rose in the polls. When Tulsi Gabbard ripped her apart, she fell to the lurking in the single digits. When Sanders in his last debate did well, he popped up in the polls. And so they matter. And so whoever is there, they better do their due. Now, this creates certain incentives that go beyond the debate itself. The debate has all of these people there and they have certain rules for the debate. But the problem is, this is kind of like anything else. Despite the rules, they have a higher objective that goes beyond the rules. The higher objective is we want to be seen, we want to be known, we want to be talked, we want to get our opinions out there, we want to do all that stuff, we want to take as much time as possible. However, the debate rules are not that. So you have people who are barging into other people's questions. It's like, let me get in there, so-and-so, like de Blasio being, gruff and abrupt in the way they go about it. I find this stuff fascinating. But it does matter in the sense of optics. And so hopefully, like I said, Sanders is a horse that I'm riding, flaws and warts and all. and hopefully he comes out swinging.
No,
And it depends. Swinging on Biden, showing distinction between Warren, because I don't want people to be pissed off at him from standpoint of Warren supporters.
right on, right on. Well, let's see how this drama or comedy, whatever this is, or horror show plays out.
A little bit of both.
Yeah, a little bit of everything. All right, man. I was really talking to you.
It's theater, man. Like it's theater. Like it's annoying theater, like where you're sitting kind of like a football match. Because that's the way CNN is a business. Their job is to maximize their profit. And what do? They have access to the debates. That's right off the bat is a travesty. You should not have something that we have a democratic system that we need to have access to, and you give corporate control of the debates. You're going to have drug companies and all advertising on these guys, meaning there's certain people in the debate that would adversely affect the policies that goes forth for CNN. And we're supposed to pretend that CNN doesn't necessarily have a dog in the debates in the way that they frame their questions. It's utter nonsense. And yet we're supposed to pretend this. There's no situation where a private media organization should have access to our public forum of debates. I'm sorry, I'm bitching.
No, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. The corporatocracy, the whole, I mean, I get it. It's a crazy scene. I hope you're right that, Sanders could prevail. I kind of see this more, we're in the Roman Empire kind of scene. So I'm not as optimistic as, but I would encourage everybody to vote for Sanders or Tulsi. I mean, it's so easy to vote. At least what do you got to lose? Even if
you have nothing to lose. Like you literally have nothing to lose. Like it's not so much that look, I think Sanders could lose. Don't misunderstand me. And I do think a party that says they can cheat in a backfield room and hasn't come to account for that could do the exact same thing again. It may not be as overt. However, I wouldn't be shocked in the least if that took place. He also could just lose, like from the standpoint of the race itself. Hell, he could be struck by lightning. I guess my feeling is like, there's nothing else to do but push as hard as you can possibly push. Because ultimately, in my mind, it changes. It's not so much that the Democratic Party becomes something else. It is what it is. But the established order of it ticks to the left. And that tick to the left has real world consequences from the standpoint of things like wages and healthcare. Like my uncle works 2 jobs. He has a grandmother, or he has a mother that he has to attend to. He didn't have to work 2 jobs if he was getting paid a decent wage on the first job. You know what I mean? That's a real world consequence. Or even healthcare. My wife gets an illness and she needs to go to see about and so they have a procedure. She gets a bill for like $1,000 from the healthcare industry. I mean, from the hospital. I'm sorry, from the doctor, and then another $700 from the hospital itself. Yeah. And then it's like, she's like, all right, yeah, that's the end of that. Meaning any incentive to go to the hospital goes away. These are normal matters across the country. You know what I mean?
This to me should be prosecuted. What they're doing, these insurance companies, to me, it's like it's on the same level of murder, mass murder.
It's their business model, which is why they shouldn't be in the model. Like an insurance company has the same incentive as any other company. I need to maximize my profit. They take in money and they determine who gets care and that type of stuff. What care is eligible for the insurance, and in order for them to maximize their profit, of course, they're going to have to turn down certain people getting coverage. Sure. Meaning the conversation between you and your doctor gets muddled because the insurance company is also in the process trying to figure out how to save money in the process. Like that's really gross. That's gross. Yeah. When I was abroad, I was getting Lyrica because the guy, he was like, look, you can just buy it over the counter in Egypt. And I bought boatloads of that stuff because instead of gabapentin, it worked a little bit better or just as well in combination. I get back to the United States insurance company. It's like, yeah, we don't cover that, despite my doctor approving the request. Yeah. Like this is everybody. This is all across the United States. And so it's like, it's a gross process where these guys are able to like instigate themselves like out of a profit thing. So yeah, this is the turn of the worm. This is the Empire Strikes Back of sorts, or not the Empire Strikes Back, but the rebels striking back, where you've screwed over people for so long. And you've just raped them blind for so long. And your breaks, your cancer, your AIDS, any of these conditions that you have, and these guys are raping you blind over it. And now the public gets the opportunity where they say, hey, do you want to get rid of the insurance company? The public says, yeah. Can I keep my doctor? Yes. All right, yeah, I'm going to do that. And the insurance company is like, wait, we can be a part of this process. Too late. You screw people over for so long. It's a horrible business model. Yeah, horrible business model. All right, my wife is telling me that. Yeah, get out of here. Dude, I appreciate this, man. Thank you for bringing me on.
You too, and it was great talking to you.
And definitely send me the link. I'll push it up.
All right, cool deal, man.
Have a good one, man.
Okay, you too.